From Keene in the Shire, the Liberty Media capital of the world, this is Daryl W. Perry, host of FPP Radio News for Thursday, March 24th, 2016. Silver is trading at $15.29 per ounce. Gold is valued at $1,222 per ounce. And according to BitcoinAverage.com, the average price of Bitcoin is $421. Antiwar.com reports U.S. officials are denying Iranian government complaints that they aren't following through on the P5+1 requirements to lift sanctions, saying they are not in any way blocking foreign banks from doing business with Iran. Though U.S. banks are still barred from doing business with Iran, Iranian officials have been complaining recently that foreign banks are also afraid to process deals for them over fear that the U.S. government will punish them for doing so. The banks are citing a lack of communication from the U.S. on any changes to policy and are subsequently assuming that previous threats to punish all foreign banks doing business with Iran are still in place, leading Iran to conclude that the sanctions relief is only happening on paper. State Department officials say they have been making the rounds to top business leaders in some countries to assure them that the U.S. is complying with the terms of the P5+1 nuclear deal. The banks, however, seem to be waiting for an explicit assurance that banking policy has changed, and the U.S. seems reluctant to offer that. For nearly 40 years, Roberts & Roberts Brokerage has been a trusted source for buying and selling precious metals like gold and silver. They also take Bitcoin for precious metal purchases and have permanently removed the minimum purchase amount for all orders paid in the digital currency. Call Roberts & Roberts today for knowledgeable advice on buying and selling precious metals and a forward-thinking approach to new technologies. 800-874-9760 or visit online at rrbi.co. UPI reports without a ninth opinion to tip the scales. It appeared Wednesday that the U.S. Supreme Court is split down the middle in deciding a legal challenge that questions an Affordable Care Act mandate that all non-theological entities must pay for birth control coverage for employees. The High Court appeared deadlocked Wednesday in the case of Zubik v. Burwell, a challenge filed by a religious-affiliated nonprofit that considers it unfair how religious institutions themselves are exempt from the mandate, but not parties strongly influenced by religion. The 8 current justices heard 90 minutes of arguments on Wednesday, appearing split evenly along ideological lines. 4 conservative judges in favor of the challenge and 4 liberal judges against it. The ACA's requirement that employers pay for birth control coverage has long been controversial. Houses of worship, such as the Catholic Church, for example, are entirely exempt from the mandate and do not have to share the cost of the coverage. Affiliated parties, though, are not exempt, leading some to feel they are directly or indirectly financing birth control. The only option available to non-exempt groups is to effectively outsource to a third party the providing of birth control, so the objecting party isn't directly facilitating the coverage. That layer of insulation, though, fails to satisfy some of those up against the moral dilemma. This case is the 4th involving a challenge to the Affordable Care Act to be heard by the Supreme Court. In January, justices declined to hear a challenge to the law which claimed Congress violated the Constitution when it passed the law in 2010. When her plush and comfy life suddenly and unexpectedly fell apart, Brooke and her dog Cloud set out to defy the odds. If this is a man's world, as they say, living on the streets is no place for a young woman. One day she awoke in the redwood forest and realized she had become a hobo, and would ultimately come to know exactly what it means to survive. How to Be a Hobo by Brooke Willett is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores. Reuters reports a task force appointed by Michigan's governor said on Wednesday that state officials showed stubbornness, lack of preparation, delay, and inaction in failing to prevent a health crisis in the city of Flint caused by lead contamination in the drinking water. There were failures on all levels of government, including the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, according to a report from the task force. However, the report highlighted failures of state agencies, especially the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, and said that the state was fundamentally accountable for what happened. Michigan Governor Rick Snyder had been criticized for the state's poor handling of the crisis that garnered national headlines. Chris Kolb, task force co-chair and president of the Michigan Environmental Council, a coalition of nonprofit groups, said at a press conference in Flint, "It was a mixture of ignorance, incompetence, and arrogance by many decision makers that created the toxic and tragic situation. The crisis has led to several lawsuits in state and federal courts and federal and state investigations." This has been FPP Radio News, online at fppradio.com.